January 1945. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Private First Class Harold Scheffel crouched behind a shattered tree trunk, his M1 Garand pressed against his shoulder. 50 meters ahead, German soldiers fired from concealed positions, their Kar 98K bolt-action rifles, creating a steady but measured rhythm of fire. Scheffel raised his rifle, acquired his target, and began shooting. He fired 8 rounds in less than 5 seconds, not in panicked spray, not in wild suppression. 8 aimed shots, 8 separate trigger pulls, no bolt to manipulate between rounds, no pause to chamber the next cartridge. The German position went silent. Scheffel dropped behind cover as the distinctive ping of his empty clip ejecting rang through the frozen air. He grabbed a fresh en-bloc clip from his bandolier, thumbed it into the receiver, and was ready to fire again in under 3 seconds. Around him, his squadmates maintained the same relentless pace. While German soldiers worked bolts and chambered rounds, American riflemen simply kept shooting. This was not the decisive battle of the European theater. No history books chronicle the fight for this particular stretch of forest. But what happened in those woods, and in 10,000 similar engagements across every theater of World War II, represented a fundamental revolution in infantry combat. For the first time in military history, ordinary infantrymen carried a semi-automatic rifle as their standard weapon, not specialists, not elite troops. Every American soldier, General George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. He was not exaggerating. The M1 Garand did not just outperform enemy rifles, it redefined what infantry combat looked like, changed tactical doctrine, and gave American forces a firepower advantage so overwhelming that enemies adapted entire defensive strategies around it. The Germans had been the masters of military innovation for 2 decades. They had revolutionized armored warfare, perfected combined arms tactics, and dominated European battlefields with methodical efficiency. But in the hands of American infantrymen, the M1 Garand was the nightmare they could not counter, not because it was indestructible, not because it was perfect, but because it allowed one man to deliver the sustained firepower that previously required an entire squad. Before we get into exactly how this rifle changed warfare forever, drop a comment below, and let us know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. To understand why the M1 Garand mattered, you need to understand what came before it, and what came before it was inadequate for modern warfare. Since the late 19th century, military rifles had followed the same basic pattern, bolt-action mechanisms fed from internal magazines holding 5 to 10 rounds. The British Lee Enfield, the German Mauser, the Russian Mosin Nagant, the American Springfield. These were magnificent weapons for their era, accurate and reliable, capable of hitting targets at 800 meters in the hands of trained marksmen. They were also slow. A bolt-action rifle required the shooter to manually operate the bolt after each shot, pull back, eject the spent casing, chamber a fresh round, close the bolt, reacquire the target, and fire again. A well-trained soldier could manage perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. An exceptional soldier might reach 20, but that rate required perfect technique, no stress and ideal conditions. Combat provided none of those things. In the chaos of battle, with incoming fire and adrenaline flooding the system, even experienced soldiers saw their rate of fire drop dramatically. Studies conducted after World War I revealed that average combat effectiveness with bolt-action rifles was approximately 8 to 12 aimed shots per minute, not because soldiers were poorly trained, but because human physiology under stress made rapid bolt manipulation difficult. The standard infantry squad compensated for this limitation through numbers. 8 to 12 men with bolt-action rifles could generate enough sustained fire to suppress enemy positions. Squad tactics emphasized coordinated volleys and fire discipline. Automatic weapons, machine guns and submachine guns provided burst firepower, but were heavy, ammunition-intensive, and required dedicated gunners. What no army had solved was the fundamental problem. How do you give an individual rifleman the ability to deliver sustained accurate fire, without making him carry a 30-pound machine gun? The semi-automatic rifle was the theoretical answer. A rifle that automatically chambered the next round after each shot, requiring only another trigger pull to fire again. No bolt manipulation, no break in the firing rhythm, just continuous shooting until the magazine ran empty. but theory and practice diverged sharply. Semi-automatic rifles had existed since the early 1900s, but they were temperamental, heavy, expensive to manufacture, and prone to jamming. Several nations experimented with semi-automatic designs during World War I and the interwar period. Germany tested the WWII-41. The Soviet Union fielded the SVT-40. France developed the MAS-38. None of them worked reliably enough for mass issue. They jammed in mud. They failed in extreme cold. Their complexity made field maintenance difficult. Their manufacturing costs were prohibitive for armies needing to equip millions of soldiers. By 1940, every major military power had concluded that semi-automatic rifles were interesting in theory, but impractical for standard infantry use. Every military power except one. John Cantius Garand was born in Quebec in 1888, the son of a French-Canadian farmer. His formal education ended at age 11. He worked in textile mills, became a machinist, and developed an obsessive interest in firearms design. By his 20s, he was filing patents for machine gun mechanisms. By 1919, the U.S. Army had noticed his work and hired him as a designer at Springfield Armory. The Army gave Garand an impossible task: design a semi-automatic rifle that was reliable, accurate, easy to manufacture, simple enough for conscript soldiers to maintain, and capable of functioning in every environment from Arctic tundra to tropical jungle. Oh, and it needed to be no heavier than existing bolt-action rifles, and cheap enough to produce in the hundreds of thousands. Garand spent 17 years on the problem. His first designs failed. They were too heavy. They jammed too easily. The gas systems fouled after a few hundred rounds. The recoil mechanisms broke. The magazines were awkward. Each failure taught him something. He refined the gas system, moving from a muzzle trap design to a gas port positioned midway down the barrel. He developed the rotating bolt mechanism that would become the rifle's signature. He solved the feeding problem with an N-block clip system that kept the action sealed from debris. By 1932, he had a working prototype that impressed Army observers enough to warrant field testing. The rifle performed well, but Garand continued refining it. The infantry wanted a .276 caliber rifle. Garand built it to those specifications. Then General Douglas MacArthur, serving as Army Chief of Staff, intervened. The Army had millions of rounds of .30 Me-06 ammunition in storage. Retooling for a new caliber would be prohibitively expensive. The rifle needed to chamber .30 Me-06. Garand redesigned the entire rifle around the more powerful cartridge. The increased recoil and pressure required strengthening the receiver, modifying the gas system, and redesigning the operating rod. He completed the work in less than a year. In January 1936, the U.S. Army adopted the M1 rifle as its standard infantry weapon. It was the first semi-automatic rifle ever adopted for general issue by any military in history. The decision was radical. Conservative military establishments worldwide viewed it as reckless. The rifle was complex compared to bolt-action designs. It required more machining, more tight tolerances, and more sophisticated manufacturing. Critics predicted it would fail in combat, that soldiers would waste ammunition. The M1 Garand operated on a gas system so elegantly simple that it became the template for virtually every semi-automatic rifle designed afterward. When the rifle fired, a small amount of propellant gas was diverted through a port in the barrel into a gas cylinder. This gas drove an operating rod backward. The operating rod rotated and withdrew the bolt, extracting the spent casing and ejecting it. A spring then drove the operating rod forward, stripping a fresh round from the clip and chambering it. The entire cycle took a fraction of a second. The shooter experienced none of this complexity. Pull trigger, rifle fires. Release trigger, pull again, rifle fires again. The mechanism was entirely self-contained. There were no external magazines to fumble with in darkness or under fire. The M-block clip system meant that 8 rounds were loaded simultaneously by pressing the clip down into the internal magazine. When the last round was fired, the empty clip was automatically ejected with that distinctive metallic ping, and the action locked open, ready for a fresh clip. 8 rounds might seem limited compared to the 20 or 30 round detachable magazines used by later rifles, But in World War II context, 8 rounds in a semi-automatic rifle represented a quantum leap in firepower. A soldier with an M1 could fire all 8 rounds in the time it took a soldier with a bolt-action rifle to fire 3. The practical rate of fire was 30 to 40 aimed shots per minute. Experienced soldiers regularly exceeded 50 rounds per minute in sustained fire. The rifle weighed 9.5 pounds, only marginally heavier than the Springfield bolt-action it replaced. It was 43.6 inches long, comfortable for soldiers of average height to carry and maneuver. The .30-06 cartridge was powerful enough to be effective at 500 meters, with maximum effective range listed at 440 meters for a trained shooter. But the real innovation was not any single specification. It was the integration of every component into a system that functioned reliably under the worst conditions imaginable. The rifle operated in temperatures from -40 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It functioned after being submerged in salt water. It fired accurately after being dropped in mud, sand, or snow. The gas system was self-regulating, requiring no adjustment for different ammunition lots or environmental conditions. Sergeant William Preston, who carried an M1 from North Africa through Sicily, Italy, and into France, wrote in a letter home in August 1944, "The rifle just works. You don't think about it. You point and shoot, point and shoot. I've seen guys fire their M1 after crawling through a river. I've seen rifles that fell off a truck and got run over by a half-track, and they still fired. Jerry has to work his bolt between every shot. We just keep shooting. That 3 seconds he spends working his bolt is 3 seconds we're putting rounds on target. In a firefight, that's the difference between going home and going into a grave." The M1 Garand's mechanical superiority would have meant little without soldiers trained to exploit it. The US Army recognized this and fundamentally restructured infantry training around the new weapon. Traditional rifle training emphasized marksmanship at long range, careful shot placement, and ammunition conservation. Recruits spent weeks on rifle ranges, learning to hit targets at 300, 500, and 800 meters. This was appropriate for bolt-action rifles, where each shot required deliberate action and ammunition capacity was limited. The M1 required different doctrine. Yes, accuracy mattered. But the rifle's semi-automatic capability allowed for rapid engagement of multiple targets, quick transitions between aim points, and sustained fire that could suppress enemy positions. The Army developed new training protocols that emphasized speed, muscle memory, and aggressive fire. Recruits learned to load fresh clips without looking, using feel alone. They practiced drawing clips from their bandoliers in darkness. They drilled on maintaining continuous fire while moving. They trained to shoot from unconventional positions, from behind cover, and while transitioning between targets. The emphasis shifted from making every shot count to making every second count. The psychological impact of this training was profound. Soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles learned to think in terms of individual shots. Soldiers armed with M1s learned to think in terms of continuous engagement. This created an offensive mindset that permeated American infantry tactics, where soldiers with bolt actions might fire, assess, and fire again. Soldiers with M1s learned to fire, fire again, and keep firing until the threat was eliminated. Lieutenant Paul Fussell, who served with the 103rd Infantry Division in France, and would later become a prominent literary scholar, recorded his training experience. "They taught us that the rifle was not a precision instrument for careful sniping. It was a tool for overwhelming the enemy with fire. The instructors hammered this into us. Keep shooting, keep moving, keep pressure on Jerry. One man with an M1 delivers more firepower than 3 men with bolt rifles. Act like it, fight like it." We did. This training philosophy extended to ammunition supply. American infantry companies received ammunition allocations that would have seemed reckless to European militaries. Where British or German soldiers might carry 50 rounds into combat, American soldiers routinely carried 80 rounds in 10 block clips, with additional ammunition available from squad supplies. The doctrine assumed high ammunition expenditure, because the M1's firepower advantage only mattered if soldiers could sustain it. Theory met reality in combat. and the M1 Garand exceeded every expectation. From Guadalcanal to the Bulge, from North Africa to the Philippines, American infantrymen discovered that they possessed a weapon their enemies could not match. The firepower differential was immediately apparent in any infantry engagement. A German squad of 9 men, armed primarily with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles and supported by one MG-42 machine gun, could generate devastating fire from prepared positions. But when forced into meeting engagements or defensive combat in close terrain, they were outgunned by American squads, where every rifleman could deliver sustained fire. Captain Charles MacDonald, commanding a rifle company in the 23rd Infantry Regiment, described a firefight near the German border in September 1944. "We advanced through a tree line and encountered a German position. Both sides went to ground simultaneously. In the old days, with bolt rifles, this would have meant a protracted engagement, both sides firing carefully while maneuvering for advantage. Instead, my entire platoon opened up with M1s. Sustained fire, not sniping. We put so many rounds downrange that the Germans couldn't return effective fire. They were pinned, and we maneuvered a squad to their flank. The fight lasted 4 minutes. With bolt rifles, it would have been 40 minutes and cost us casualties we couldn't afford. The rifle proved equally effective in jungle warfare. In the Pacific Theater, where combat distances were often under 100 meters and surprise encounters were common, the M1's rapid fire was decisive. Japanese forces, armed primarily with the Arisaka bolt-action rifle, were at a severe disadvantage in the close-range firefights that characterized island combat. Corporal Eugene Sledge, whose memoir, With the Old Breed, became one of the definitive accounts of Pacific combat, carried an M1 through Peleliu and Okinawa. The Japanese were brave, well-trained, and fanatical, but when we hit their positions, our fire superiority was overwhelming. Every Marine had an M1. We could deliver more fire than they could answer. I watched Japanese soldiers break from cover to charge our positions. They would manage perhaps 2 shots from their bolt rifles before 6 or 8 of us cut them down with M1 fire. It was slaughter, but war is slaughter. The rifle gave us the advantage, and we used it. The M1's reliability became legendary. Rifles functioned after exposure to conditions that would have disabled more delicate weapons. They fired after being immersed in seawater during amphibious assaults. They operated in the sub-zero temperatures of the Ardennes winter. They functioned in the mud and rain of monsoon season. Armorers reported malfunction rates far lower than predicted, and most malfunctions were user error, rather than mechanical failure. This reliability extended the rifle's psychological impact. Soldiers trusted the M1 implicitly. They knew it would fire when they needed it. This trust translated into confidence, and confidence translated into aggressive tactics. American infantry developed a reputation for immediate violent response to contact. When fired upon, they did not seek cover and assess. They returned fire immediately and massively, using their M1s to suppress the enemy while maneuvering for advantage. German soldiers, who had dominated European battlefields with superior tactics and training, found themselves on the receiving end of American firepower and did not enjoy the experience. German infantry doctrine emphasized marksmanship, fire discipline, and the machine gun as the squad's primary weapon. Riflemen armed with Kar 98K bolt actions were expected to deliver accurate fire, while the MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun provided sustained firepower. This system worked brilliantly when German forces held prepared defensive positions or when attacking against enemies with comparable weapons. Against American infantry armed with M1s, the doctrine faltered. German soldiers discovered that their individual riflemen were outgunned in any direct engagement. Where a German soldier could fire perhaps 12 aimed shots per minute, his American counterpart could fire 30 to 40. In a squad-on-squad firefight, this numerical disparity was decisive. General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, who served as a Corps Chief of Staff on both Eastern and Western fronts, wrote in his post-war analysis, Panzer Battles, "The American semi-automatic rifle was a weapon of devastating effectiveness. In close combat, our soldiers were simply outgunned. A single American squad could deliver firepower comparable to a German platoon. This forced us into defensive tactics even when we sought to attack. We learned to rely increasingly on machine guns and automatic weapons, but this made our infantry less flexible and more vulnerable to American artillery. German soldiers began reporting psychological effects from sustained M1 fire. The continuous crack of semi-automatic rifles, without the pauses that bolt-action fire imposed, created a perception of being hopelessly outnumbered. German after-action reports from Normandy, through the Rhine crossing, repeatedly noted that American infantry seemed far more numerous than intelligence estimates suggested, largely because the volume of fire made squads sound like platoons. Oberleutnant Hans von Luck, a regimental commander, who fought American forces in Tunisia and Normandy, recorded his observations. "We knew the Americans had this rifle, intelligence had described it, but knowing about a weapon and facing it in combat are different experiences. The first time we engaged American infantry in Tunisia, we thought we faced at least a battalion. The fire was continuous, overlapping, never pausing. We discovered it was perhaps 2 companies, but every man had this semi-automatic rifle. The psychological effect was significant. Our soldiers felt outnumbered, even when they were not." Japanese military assessments were even more grim. After-action reports from Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan consistently identified American firepower superiority as a decisive factor. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized close combat and aggressive assault, tactics that played directly into the M1's strengths. Japanese soldiers attempting banzai charges were mowed down by sustained M1 fire at ranges where bolt-action rifles would have required reloading multiple times. The M1 Garand's impact was not limited to individual superiority. What made it truly revolutionary was that America manufactured enough of them to arm millions of soldiers. This required an industrial achievement as impressive as the rifle's design. When the Army adopted the M1 in 1936, Springfield Armory was producing approximately 50 rifles per day. By 1941, production had ramped to several hundred per day. After Pearl Harbor, the industrial mobilization went into overdrive. Winchester Repeating Arms Company received contracts for M1 production. Springfield Armory expanded its facilities. New manufacturing techniques reduced production time while maintaining quality. The rifle required sophisticated machining. The receiver was forged from high-grade steel and required precise tolerances. The gas system needed careful manufacturing to ensure proper function. The trigger group contained multiple small parts that had to meet exact specifications. Despite this complexity, American factories refined production to the point where rifles could be manufactured for approximately $85 each, equivalent to about $1,500 in modern currency. By 1945, American industry had produced over 4 million M1 rifles. Springfield Armory accounted for roughly 3,500,000. Winchester produced approximately 500,000. International Harvester briefly manufactured M1s under contract. The production scale was unprecedented for a semi-automatic weapon and represented a gamble that American industrial capacity could meet demand for a complex firearm. The gamble succeeded. Every American infantry division that deployed to combat was fully equipped with M1 rifles. Replacement rifles were available to replace combat losses and mechanical failures. By 1944, the U.S. Army had enough M1s that surplus production was redirected to equipping Allied forces. Free French units received M1s, some British Special Operations units acquired them. Even Soviet forces received limited numbers through Lend-Lease, though they proved less enthusiastic about the rifle than American troops. The production achievement extended beyond quantity to quality. Despite the massive scale of manufacturing, M1 rifles maintained impressive consistency. Barrels were manufactured to precise tolerances. Gas systems functioned reliably. The rifles were durable enough that many examples manufactured in 1942 remained in service through Korea and even into Vietnam. Master Sergeant Roy Dunlap, an Army ordnance specialist who worked on firearms throughout World War II and wrote extensively about military weapons, noted the M1 was a machinist's nightmare and a soldier's dream. It required skilled labor and good steel and precise manufacturing. The fact that we built 4 million of them, and that they worked, and kept working, was an industrial achievement that equaled any other part of the war effort. We outproduced and out-equipped the enemy in tanks, in ships, in aircraft. The M1 was proof we could do the same with individual infantry weapons. The M1 Garand did not just improve American infantry performance, it fundamentally altered how American forces fought. Tactical doctrine evolved to exploit the rifle's capabilities, creating an aggressive, fire-intensive approach to infantry combat that became the hallmark of American operations. Traditional infantry tactics emphasized careful fire control, ammunition conservation, and the squad as a single unit maneuvering under the direction of a squad leader. The machine gun delivered suppressive fire, while riflemen advanced or held positions. Riflemen provided precision fire and defended the machine gun. American doctrine with the M1 shifted this paradigm. Every rifleman was now capable of delivering sustained fire. The squad became a collection of mobile firepower nodes, rather than a single unit centered on one machine gun. Tactics emphasized aggressive fire and movement, with riflemen laying down covering fire for each other while advancing by fire team. The marching fire technique, where soldiers fired their M1s from the hip while advancing, became controversial but effective in close combat. Officers debated whether this encouraged ammunition waste, but frontline soldiers found it devastatingly effective for breaking through defensive positions. The psychological impact of 12 men advancing while firing semi-automatic rifles continuously was often sufficient to break enemy morale before close combat occurred. Small unit tactics evolved to maximize the M1's strengths. Fire teams of 4 men could suppress enemy positions while other teams maneuvered to flanks. The rifle's accuracy allowed American forces to engage at longer ranges than submachine guns, but with higher rates of fire than bolt-action rifles. This created a tactical middle ground that was extremely difficult for enemies to counter. The impact extended to combined arms coordination. American infantry, confident in their firepower superiority at squad level, operated more aggressively when supported by armor or artillery. They would close rapidly with enemy positions, using M1 fire to suppress defenders while tanks or artillery reduced fortifications. German forces noted that American infantry seemed fearless in attack, a quality partly attributable to their confidence in the M1's firepower. Colonel S.L.A. Marshall, the military historian, who conducted extensive post-combat interviews with infantry units, concluded in his study Men Against Fire, the M1 rifle changed how American soldiers think about combat. They do not fear firefights, because they know they can win them. This confidence is not bravado. It is rational assessment of their weapons capability. A squad with M1s will defeat a squad with bolt rifles in most circumstances. American soldiers know this. They act accordingly. The rifle gave us tactical advantages that good training and bravery alone could not provide. The M1 Garand remained America's standard infantry rifle through Korea, where its firepower proved equally decisive against Chinese and North Korean forces. It was gradually replaced by the M14 Select Fire rifle in the late 1950s, which was essentially an M1 modified for automatic fire and equipped with a detachable magazine. Even then, many soldiers preferred the M1's simplicity and reliability. The rifle's influence extended far beyond American service. The gas-operated, rotating bolt system that Garand perfected became the basis for virtually every successful semi-automatic and automatic rifle designed afterward. The Soviet seized the American M14, the Belgian FAL, and eventually the M16 all owed conceptual debt to Garand's design. More importantly, the M1 proved that semi-automatic rifles could be issued as standard infantry weapons. Before the M1, this was theoretical. After the M1, it became inevitable. Every military in the world began developing semi-automatic rifles for their infantry. By the 1950s, the question was not whether infantry would carry semi-automatic weapons, but which design would be adopted. The tactical revolution the M1 initiated, the emphasis on individual firepower and aggressive fire and movement tactics, became the foundation of modern infantry doctrine. American infantry operations in Korea, Vietnam, and every subsequent conflict reflected lessons learned with the M1. that infantry armed with rapid-fire weapons can seize and hold ground through firepower superiority, that aggressive tactics work when individual soldiers can deliver sustained fire, and that mechanical reliability matters more than theoretical perfection. John Garand never became wealthy from his rifle. He was a salaried government employee. He held patents, but they belonged to the US government. He received a $100,000 award from Congress in 1944, a significant sum but a tiny fraction of what a private designer might have earned from licensing fees on 4 million rifles. He did not seem to mind. By all accounts, Garand was a modest man who cared more about solving engineering problems than achieving recognition. He continued working at Springfield Armory until his retirement in 1953. He died in 1974 at age 86, having seen his rifle serve in 2 major wars and become the foundation for modern infantry weapons. His legacy was not in wealth or fame. It was in the testimony of millions of soldiers who carried his rifle into combat and came home because it worked when they needed it. It was in the German soldiers who faced American infantry and recognized they were outgunned. It was in the tactical doctrines that evolved to exploit the weapon's capabilities. It was in every semi-automatic rifle, designed since 1936, that borrowed elements of his gas system and rotating bolt. General Patton called the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised, and history validated that assessment. Not because it was perfect, not because it was invincible, but because it gave ordinary infantry soldiers a weapon that worked reliably under the worst conditions imaginable and delivered firepower that fundamentally altered tactical combat. The mathematics of superiority. In the end, the M1 Garand superiority came down to simple mathematics. An American infantry squad of 12 men, each carrying an M1 with 8-round clips, could deliver approximately 400 aimed rounds per minute in sustained fire. A comparable German squad of 9 men with Kara 98K bolt-action rifles could deliver approximately 100 aimed rounds per minute, even with their MG-42 machine gun contributing. 4-to-1 firepower superiority. That was the mathematical reality that German, Japanese, and Italian forces faced when engaging American infantry. No amount of training, courage, or tactical skill could overcome that disparity in prolonged engagements. The side that can put 4 times as many bullets on target in the same time frame will win most firefights. The M1 Garand was not flawless. The M-block clip system, while reliable, made partial reloads difficult. The 8-round capacity was limiting compared to larger magazines. The rifle was heavy by modern standards. The distinctive ping of the ejecting clip theoretically alerted enemies that a soldier was reloading, though combat veterans reported this was rarely an issue in actual fighting. But these minor flaws were irrelevant compared to the rifle's overwhelming advantages. It was reliable, it was accurate, it was powerful, it was fast, and most critically, it was issued to every American infantryman, giving entire armies a firepower advantage that enemies simply could not counter. When Harold Scheffel fired those 8 rounds in 5 seconds in the Hürtgen Forest, he was not performing an extraordinary feat. He was executing exactly what the M1 Garand was designed to do: allow an ordinary soldier to deliver sustained, accurate fire that overwhelmed enemies before they could effectively respond. Multiply that capability across millions of soldiers, and you understand why the M1 earned its reputation as the best battle rifle of World War II. The rifle that John Garand spent 17 years perfecting gave American infantry an advantage that shaped the outcome of every ground campaign where they fought. It was not the only factor in Allied victory, but it was a significant factor, one that provided American soldiers with a tool that worked exactly as promised when their lives depended on it. And in the end, that was all that mattered.